After his release, he and his brother Billy head to one of the most influential casinos in the area with the plan to get their money back from the owner, crime boss Dorothy Matcha. Overruling his bodyguard Paul's objections, he lets Jake sit in his private game. On the way up, Jake has a problem getting into the elevator because he is claustrophobic. However, his fellow bodyguards remind him they have to go up 20 floors. So he relents and steps into the elevator while fighting an attack of panic. Jake's first bet is on a chip toss against another player at a table and loses. But this is intentional. He's manipulating Matcha into a false sense of security, so when he makes the same bet with him, he wins this time. Billy and Jake rush out of the casino with their bags full of cash, and on their way out, they are stopped by Zach, who tells them they are in danger and he can help them before giving Jake his card. This time, Jake takes the stairs, but before he could go down one step, he falls down and passes out since the card said take the elevator. While Jake was rushed to the hospital, Matcha voiced his concerns to Paul. Jake must want bigger revenge after 7 years in jail, especially after the event with his sister-in-law. That is why Matcha orders Paul to hire the best hitman in the business, get rid of Jake. At the hospital, there was no cause for Jake's blackout apparently, so he will just go home and rest on the blood test's results. Billy goes to his own house while Jake takes the bodyguards for protection, but all of them are shot as soon as they arrive. The only reason why he manages to dodge is that he finds a card on the floor that says pick this up, so he bends over to do exactly so. He gets into his car and tries to escape, but the driver is shot too. Luckily for him, Zach arrives just in time to save him and take him away. The hitman, Sorter, can't understand how he missed, since he never misses, and theorizes someone must have tipped Jake off. What he tells Matcha when he scolds him, however, is that he missed because he had a bad feeling. Meanwhile, Zach takes Jake to meet his partner, Avi. Apparently, Avi has somehow placed his hands on the medical file of Jake, and the results are ready. It appears that Jake has a rare blood disease that will kill him within 3 days. They offer to protect Jake in exchange for 2 conditions, which cannot be negotiated. He must give them all his money and do everything they ask for or answer any questions. They give him 3 hours to decide and let him go, but Jask leaves without saying anything because he believes they are trying to trick him. The results he gets at the hospital are the same ones, but Jask here once again thinks the lab must have been paid by Zach and Avi, so he gets a second opinion from his private doctor, who also gives him the same prognosis. After threatening him with his gun to make sure he isn't also being paid, Jake admits he has no choice and, after taking money from the bank, goes back to accept the men's deal. As they go out for a ride, Avi explains they're loan sharks, and it'll be Jake's money that they'll be loaning. Avi insists Jake tell him everything about his past with Matcha after visiting their first client to make the drop for them. Matcha used to have 3 very stupid men working for him that were known as the 3 Eddies. They lost their card man before a big game, and they knew Jake was a good player, so they hired him to fill in. Jake wanted to decline, but they threatened Billy's family, so he had to accept to protect them. However, during the game, the other men on the table began insulting Jake and his mother. Jake wouldn't accept that, so he started a gunfight. The power went off, the money disappeared, and the next thing he knew, someone dropped his name and Jake was being questioned by the police. They threatened his niece and, in the attempt to protect her daughter, killed his sister-in-law. Jake never told the cops that Matcha had organized the games and was jailed for 7 years during that time. The Eddies must have upset him in some way that made him use them as concrete. Zach then sends Jake to spend some time in a motel after visiting a string of clients. Meanwhile, Matcha and Paul head off to pay homage to crime kingpin Sam Gold, considered the ultimate figure all other crime bosses want to be like. However, Gold never gets visitors, so they instead meet with his advisor, Lily Walker, who agrees to facilitate a deal over powder for Matcha. She also reminds him that Gold doesn't like publicity or give second chances. Sometime later, Jake gives Zach and Avi more money before he's asked about his time in jail while playing chess with Avi. Jake had been given 2 options, 14 years of normal time or 7 years of solitary, so he chose solitary. His cell was between 2 men, a chess master and a conman, that had been there for a long time. and while they never talked to each other, they knew everything about each other. During the first 5 years in prison, those three communicated and sent each other messages on slips of paper smuggled out and in with books from the library where Jake learned of their formula in winning any game in the world. The two men planned for a prison break and promised Jake that they were going to take him along at last. Leaving without any indication, they walked away and left Jake standing there. When he was released 2 years later, he learned that those two men had taken all his money and only left behind a note that said you can only get smarter by playing a smarter opponent. So Jake started using the formula to make himself rich at various casinos. Passing by each day, Jake continues working by visiting various clients and giving away his own money. He's also supposed to threaten them if they don't pay, but he can't bring himself to hurt innocent, desperate people. Meanwhile, Avi and Zach are chaining the side of a wall to a truck, so when they pull, they break said wall and steal the safe on the other side. This safe had the powder Matcha promised Lily, so when he discovers he's been robbed, he sends Paul to solve this no matter what it takes. Paul goes to see their rival, triad kingpin Laura John, who accepts to provide them with the powder on such short notice but only for an overinflated price. Jake, Zach, Avi, and his team go to the hotel where the exchange will take place. They sneak into a room next to the thugs to make a hole in the wall and inject sleeping gas, putting both Matches and John's men to sleep. Then they steal the money and the powder, framing it to make it look it was Matcha that robbed John and vice versa. Sometime later, Jake receives a call from Billy, who informs him that he has been asking around and has found out that Zach and Avi are so dangerous that not even gold would touch them, so Jake should get out of there. Jake does not listen and goes back to work, where he is being expected to shoot a scared client. He refuses and attempts to shoot Avi instead, but he realizes the gun is empty right before Avi knocks him out. Jake wakes up hours later in the motel and gets a call from Avi saying he's survived his third day, so he should get a checkup. After being visited by his niece and Billy, who leaves him a gun just in case, Jake goes to see his doctor, who confirms the diagnosis had been wrong and Jake is fine. He tries to call Avi and demand answers, but Avi only says he'll have to wait. Meanwhile, Paul has been gathering information, and Jake's name has come up as involved in all the problems his men have been going through, so Match orders him to kill him. When Jake returns to the motel, Avi and Zach are waiting for him and warn him that Match's thugs are waiting inside the room. Jake runs away, but the men followed him, and he managed to keep them away, especially after one of the thugs slipped and, by accident, shot himself. The other bad guys find the body and believe that Jake did it. Then, Jake goes over to Avi and Zach's office to confess that he didn't tell them the whole truth about his old deal with the Eddies. Those three clowns have been waiting for Jake when he gets out of prison to kill him, as their employment was terminated by Matcha because of this. In order to save his life, he proposed to the Eddies to give them a deal. Every month, he was going to give them 3% of any money they were going to lend him. The first time, only one Eddie agreed with it, but when they saw he kept his deal, they all wanted to be in, this time for a 4%. In truth, Jake was paying each Eddie with another Eddie's money, so he wasn't losing anything. It came to a point where they didn't have any more money to lend, so they borrowed from Matcha, who quickly became interested in the Eddie's mysterious moneymaker man. After playing roulette with the formula and making himself rich, Jake decided that day to take a break with his brother and niece, and that is when Matcha killed the Eddies for not paying him back. Now, about Matcha: he's having dinner in a fine dining restaurant when he's visited by his henchmen, that inform him that Jake escaped. Sorta knows that John's lover is an imposter waitress, so he shoots her and then leaves the restaurant to chase after her driver. But his shooting is still off, and he only managed to hurt her instead of killing her, so before she died, the woman managed to shoot Match's finger off in the middle of the chaos. Then, Sorta was sent to Lord John's hideout to kill him and his men. Back to Jake, he's still talking to Zach and Avi as they play golf on a roof. They explain to him that nobody ever gets to see gold because he doesn't actually exist, he's just a representation of ego and the personification of greed. He only has power over those who invest in him. So what Jake needs to do is change the rules about what he allows to control him. Afterwards, Jake takes the rest of his money from the bank and gives away everything before sneaking into Matcha's bedroom. While fighting with the voices in his head that represent his ego, Jake apologizes to Matcha for having tricked him out of his money, accepts him as the superior crime lord, and lets him know that he made a donation in his name before exiting. In his attempt to confront the fears that gripped him from the beginning, he takes the elevator, which stuck on the 13th floor. When repelling a panic attack, he thinks through a mental conversation in which he rejects his ego, finally stepping out of the game as a free man. Now that the elevator begins working once more, Jake reaches the ground floor and finds Matcha waiting for him, armed with a gun, driven insane by his own ego. However, Jake does not even look at him, and he leaves the room without so much as looking back, which sends Matcha insane because he can't comprehend why somebody won't fear him. He starts crying, realizing just how utterly humiliated he has been. The next morning, Paul brings Matcha all the local newspapers for him to see his name plastered all over them. Jake hadn't been lying when he said he made a donation in Matcha's name, and now everyone thinks the casino owner cares about the community. Matcha is glad to take the credit, but his blissful state is short-lived because he almost learns from Paul that Jake has the powder and's been playing all of them along. Paul, Sorter, and the rest of Matcha's henchmen go pay a visit to Billy, who manages to hide his daughter in the cupboard as soon as he realizes one of his bodyguards has betrayed him. Once they find him, the men start hurting him as they question him, not believing when he tells them that he doesn't know where Jake and the powder are. The more Paul gets into torturing him, the more Sorter becomes uncomfortable, especially when they make the girl come out of the cupboard after hearing her sobbing. Refusing to cause harm to child, Sorter abandons his pride and starts killing his fellow goons systematically and in an efficient way, but at the climax commits a blunder and gets killed too. Meanwhile, Lily arrives at Matcha's place. She has brought him a garland sent by Gold, who isn't pleased by seeing his name all over the newspapers because he doesn't like publicity. Lily also lets him know that Matcha's time is over and he won't get a second chance, which throws him into another panicking fit. Avi and Zach take Jake and the powder to Matcha's casino, where Avi finally beats Jake at a game of chess while confessing the last few details of the story. He and Zach had been the men in the cells next to Jake's, and they always wanted to take him away with them, but he hadn't been ready to accept the truth, implying they have been nothing but merely figments of Jake's imagination. At the very moment when this is coming in, the casino's bodyguards show up to whisk him off to see Matcha, who brings the girl along. In throwing the bags of powder down to the floor, Jake says all will be right, and in doing so pushes Matcha crazy for Jake remains emotionless as ever. He points a gun at a child, not showing the fear that the girl's abduction instilled within his heart. Humiliation causes the ego voices in Matcha's mind to reach the conclusion that Jake can't hurt a dead man, so he puts the gun against his head and shoots.